Welcome to When the Dutch Went to Space. We have arrived at episode number 12, where we will see lots of firsts. So we're going to see the first flight of our new spacecraft, the first rendezvous, and the first docking, the first spacewalk. But first, let's talk about Haddock A1, launching at the 3rd of May in 1965. And this is actually why I designed the NL4 with a payload mass of 4 ton to low Earth orbit. And you can see that with the new spacecraft being that heavy, we don't need our patented let's shut down one of the engines to avoid passing or avoid our crew from passing out because of the G-forces. G-forces are not exceeded using this craft. The blinking is actually kind of an oversight on my part. You can see a green line blinking, which are of course the aircraft navigation lights, but well. In the craft you can see Maaike van den Berg and Helmut Schulz from the German department, and together they are going to test out this new spacecraft. They're not going to spend that much time in space. We haven't unlocked all the technology that we need, but I wanted to get a head start on it. This craft is battery powered, but has food for 14 days, so it's not going to have enough power, but we're going to test out the systems. And you're looking at Maaike performing the first spacewalk. Well, that is the first spacewalk for us, because Alexei Leonov beat us to it. Yeah, he's a bit earlier, and the US will be a bit later, but she's doing great, and you can see she's using the tether connected to her imaginary EVA pack. I think that's a mistake of the Kerbal inventory system. But nevertheless, I stole this trick from N9, at least I think it was N9, or it was Beardy in the For All Kerbal Kind series. This is a great way, and you can see here Helmut being even more adventurous and letting go of the ladder and floating off into space, fully relying on his tether to come back, because without the tether, he is so screwed up, because we're never gonna get him back. But just look at that, him floating away in his beautiful EVA suit, looking at the sunshine, gathering all kinds of information before grabbing the ladder again. And you can see I should have probably locked the tether, but I didn't. And well, all is well. Systems check out perfectly. They light up their 4 thrusters, so I added 4 thrusters before realizing actually that they don't have a failure rate, but I wanted to make sure that they can always come back. And here you can see them come back. We also packed 2 parachutes rather than 1. And I'm not sure if the decals really like the temperature, and they seem to burn off. But we have plenty of ablator left, as you will see me check in a minute. And the spacecraft safely makes its return back to Earth. And we are calling this a success. And slightly after that, at the 2nd of June, we have Haddock A2 and A3 on the pad. And Haddock A3 is powered by Shuarto Sinage and Helmut Schulz. And they're actually the first to launch they will launch into a 145 by 145 kilometer orbit. And if you looked very carefully, you could see the A2 standing on the other pad. So we now have 2 launch pads. And they will launch immediately after I've been able to put the A3 into orbit. Like they're gonna launch just before Shuarto and Helmut will catch up with them. So we'll put them in a 300 by 300 kilometer orbit, a little bit higher, which means that the A3 will actually catch up to them. Still, it was kind of hard to get it right. Like in stock KSP, I've been able to launch to an intercept, but I've never been able to do that in a real solar system. So I just, being a lazy person, I give myself plenty of time. So we're going to boost them up into a higher orbit, and they will take a day to catch up and actually get the rendezvous burn. And in real life, this happened in 1965 with Gemini 6. When Wally Schirra, or Shira, I think Wally Schirra, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, sorry. They managed to catch up they were doing Gemini 6, and I think the others were in Gemini 7, and they managed to get very, very close, like within a foot or something like that. which is very impressive. And we're gonna see if we can do better than that. And you can see me clicking around, aligning target ports, discovering that I had not put RCS on the back of the craft. So I actually have to use the main thrusters to drive us forward, which proved to be very tedious. So it took me a long time to get them close together, but you can see the spacecraft lining up perfectly and actually getting close, and then nothing happened. We didn't have a hard dock, and you can see me frantically clicking around, looking at alignment, seeing if I need to turn the craft in a certain position to make sure that they dock, but I can't make them dock, and I really want them to dock, but this proves really hard. I spent about 2 hours in real time to try and make this work, and I clicked around and I tried and I banged them into each other ferociously, and then I thought, well, just as I had given up, like maybe there's still something stuck between the docking port, and it turned out I had added the fairing ring to the docking port rather than the docking port to the fairing ring. So after actually decoupling, I got rid of the excess parts, and I'm going for the second attempt, which proved to be hard because it was already drifted apart quite a long distance. But we caught up again, we're in the sunlight, we are aligned, we're going for dock. And this happened in real life in 1966 when Neil Armstrong docked Gemini 8 to their Agena target vehicle. So not really two spacecraft. That didn't happen until 1969 with Soyuz 4 and 5, like the USSR managed to do that. They tried to do it in 67 with Soyuz 1 and 2, but that didn't really turn out that well, since the Soyuz, especially early Soyuz, was not a very good spacecraft with lots of problems and resulted in the unfortunate death of Komarov, which was really a sad day in history. Nevertheless, we are successful, and Haddock number 2 and 3, maybe I should explain the name, huh? Like we had Kuifje, our first spacecraft, and Captain Haddock is of course his dear friend. And so the second generation of spacecraft is called Haddock. I may let go of that naming scheme at some point, but no, yeah. Sonarti also wants to stretch her legs, and she gets out of he gets out of his capsule and is actually trying to walk over to the other spacecraft. So my idea was to swap the crew, and this actually happened on Soyuz 4 and 5. However, the ladders proved to be non-existent, and the trajectory, I just thought it was too dangerous. So I decided to let go of it. I kept them together for another 24 hours, gathered the science, and enjoy this miniature space station that they have built. And after having spent all that time in space, it's time for them to return home. And you can see me align the directions. I'm not sure why it's glowing blue. And it's gonna fire up its retro rockets, and there we go. Very uneventful return to service. I'm trying a couple of different trajectories, so I'm trying almost a close ballistic trajectory to see if that what it's going to do with the heat on the heat shield. And I'm going also for shallower return trajectories to see if I can use that or even skip off the atmosphere before we're actually trying this with much higher velocities. But regardless, they make it back in one piece, and they're extremely happy, of course. Now it's up to the other two to get back, and you can see them. They've picked up a spin, which is very unfortunate, and in the Gemini capsule, if you end up in this spin, you can end up in the situation that it's actually pointing nose down. But this our beautiful Haddock spacecraft, the K2 capsule, is self-orienting again because of the low center of mass. And that's also something that's really good to discover. Like, regardless of how we hit the atmosphere, it will turn up correctly. And then we arrive in 1965 on August the 30th. We have Peter de Graaf, or Peter de Graaf. You can find him on Spotify. He's actually a famous piano player. But I'm not sure if that's the same Peter de Graaf. Like, that's a common name. And Wowie the Eka, which is a scientist, and together they are going up for 14 days. Yes, we've upgraded the craft a little bit, and particularly we've added a fuel cell. So we are now turning liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen into water, which will replenish our supplies, but it's also going to provide electricity. And we actually got 2 of them, so we got a backup in case something goes wrong. And we're busting the Gemini 6 rocket, who spent 8 days in space, just 9 days prior to our mission. And unfortunately in December, Gemini 7 will achieve this 14 days in orbit as well. But I'm calling it a first, so this is a great achievement for the Dutch Space Agency. Or is it ESA now? I'm starting to lose track. So I think from Texel we're still developing new spacecraft, where the most of the interplanetary missions and the lunar program is actually being run from Surya Spaceport in Indonesia. And if you want to know why I picked Indonesia, you should go back to episode 1 and I'll explain why I believe that in this alternative reality the Dutch could potentially be a spacefaring power. And we can see them come back safely, and it's another water landing. There we go. And November, and to be precise, the 25th of November and the 29th of December, we are launching to Huygens spacecraft. So 2 additional deep space explorers launching on an Ariane 1 or a Europa 1 rocket. And the first one is actually going to Venus, and we still have to fulfill this contract to create a Venus orbiter, and that's where this mission is all about. But since I had the backup craft, of course, I thought, well, maybe I have enough Delta V to do a flyby of Mercury. And like Mariner 10 got to Mercury in 1973, so we're almost a decade earlier. Well, not precisely a decade, but like close. And Pioneer 1 is the first US craft that will actually orbit Venus, and it won't be able to do that until 1978. And so we're definitely beating the Yanks on that part. However, this is the only footage you will see of Huygens number 6 heading for Mercury, because I'm not sure what happened, but my orbits got screwed up and we missed it completely. Like we had a perfect course, it was supposed to be there, but when the alarm clock rang, it wasn't. It ended up somewhere in deep space, flying off. And it was quite a bummer, because it's an expensive craft, and I had spent so much time using the RCS to tweak her exactly to zip by Mercury and get these sweet science and all the pictures from low altitude. And I guess we'll just have to do it again. The Venus craft is going to be more successful, but I'm going to show you that in a different episode. So now you can see the crafts on their merry way. I did forgot to update the decals on them, so they're both called 4. And finally, the 16th of 1966, Peter de Graaf goes again with his buddy Sunarti Sinaga, and they are testing maybe the final iteration of this spacecraft design. I'm not sure if it's going to be the final, but it's the most mature iteration. So it's got the power cells, it's got the food, it's got the oxygen, it's got water generation is working, it's got a new heat shield based on lunar re-entry, it's got the power is the most important thing, I guess. Oh yeah, it's got the new RCS thrusters. That's really gonna make docking so much easier. And yeah, you saw the RCS blip up a little bit. More efficient engines, like the engines were moved up, and their mission is to spend about 8 days in space, and they're gonna run a couple of experiments with orbital maneuvers. So they're gonna raise their apogee to beyond the Van Allen belts, and they're actually gonna pass through the Van Allen belts several times. Now, the Gemini program is not going to do that, nor neither is the Voskhod program from the USSR. It's only with Apollo that people venture outside of the magnetosphere and go through all these magnetical particles and observe what it actually does to your body. The Americans were very, very good at doing this. Like they picked the right moment in time where the Van Allen belt was at its weakest and the solar activity was at its lowest. But you could also be slightly more bold and just throw your people out there, which is what we are doing. I'm not sure if this is wise. We're picking up a bit of radiation, and but I think it's a good test. And what's also important is by raising the apogee, you have a higher orbital velocity and you can test the heat shield in a better way. Plus you get beautiful views of the Earth. Like, look at this stuff. Many thanks to Ballistic Fox and BlackRack for creating these beautiful apps that they have created, like Scatterer and the configs for it. And I urge you to go on Patreon, support them, and get this to make your install look as beautiful as this. Because I've never played KSP with such a beautiful set of clouds. And yeah, with that we've come to the end of the episode, and we've also come to the end of the mission of Peter and Tsunarti, and they are returning back to Earth. They're burning a retrograde from a very high position and trying to get back as fast as they can through the atmosphere. So their mission is really to butcher the heat shield and see if it can withstand high velocity re-entries. There we go. And by putting a gentle spin on the craft, the decals actually stay in one piece, which is also new. Anyway, they survive. Tsunarti did black out for a moment, but he or she is alright, and they're coming back through the cloud wave as both parachutes deploy. And I'll see you in the next episode.